Welcome to Part 2A of our ELA Spring Webinar Series for grades 3 through 5. These recordings are based on the spring webinars we hosted in March 2025. The hosted webinars consisted of 2 sessions for grades 3 through 5. To reduce the length of the recordings, we have broken each of those 2 sessions into 2 sections. This is Part 2A in a series that also contains 1A, 1B, and 2B. In Parts 1A and 1B, we looked at some of the sample release items and the assessment specifications documents. Part 2A will focus on the TDW item and how to support narrative writing instruction. While we are using the 3rd grade TDW sampler that is located on our Assessment Quick Links webpage, our focus today will be on narrative writing instruction and how writing instruction supports the TDW item. For questions about the TDW scoring rubrics, please watch our video, Transitioning from TDA to TDW. Teaching the writing process. We are not teaching a test item. This is where we ended up with the text-dependent analysis item. The TDW item and scoring rubrics are tightly aligned with our grade level writing indicators. We did this intentionally to allow teachers to focus on writing instruction and not on a test item. Consider this. If we only teach writing as practice for a test item, we send the message to students that writing is only valuable for a test item. It is important that we teach all 3 types of writing. If 4th grade teachers only teach narrative writing because of the TDW item, 2 things will happen. Students won't be prepared for 5th grade argumentative writing, which increases the workload of the 5th grade teacher. The lack of additional writing instruction could also impact students' SC Ready scores because all modes are assessed on SC Ready through the standalone items. This could, in turn, impact schools' data. Our focus today is on narrative writing and the TDW item. Part 2B focuses on argumentative writing and the 5th grade argumentative TDW item. This is the prompt released for 3rd grade. Before we explore how the prompt is connected to the grade level indicators, I would first like to remind you that not all of the TDW prompts are the same. With the text-dependent analysis item, there was a formula to how the item was written. This is not true with the TDW items. The TDW items are more tightly aligned to our writing standards, and what they ask is determined by what the text has to offer. Just as not all texts are the same, neither are the TDW prompts. This prompt, for example, provides students with a new direction for the story and asks them to write from there. Not all narrative prompts will do this. However, if we teach to the intent of the narrative writing indicator, students will be prepared for any narrative prompt they may receive. Let's look at the indicator. On the left side, you will see the TDW prompt. We have identified the setting in blue. It is more detailed in the passage than what is mentioned in the prompt. On the right, we see that establishing a setting is in both the 3rd and 4th grade narrative writing indicators. On the left side, you will see the narrator identified in blue. On the right side, we see mention of point of view. Third grade students do not have to know the difference between first and third person points of view. That does not enter the reading standards until fourth grade. Third grade students do need to be able to determine that the narrator in this passage is also a character in this story. For this TDW item, the student writer needs to decide if he or she will continue writing the story as Little Pine or if he or she will choose a different narrator. Whichever the student writer chooses, he or she must stay with it throughout the response. Both grade level indicators expect students to be able to develop a character or characters. Students add to their narrative techniques in fourth grade. While dialogue is in the third grade grammar and conventions indicator, it is not in the third grade narrative writing indicator. This means that on SC Ready, we may assess the placement of quotation marks around dialogue on standalone grammar items, but it is not an expectation of narrative writing until fourth grade. Does that mean that third grade teachers cannot teach dialogue in narrative writing? No, it does not. Instruction can go beyond the grade level indicator. Summative assessment will not. In blue, you see elements of plot. Notice that this prompt asks students to consider what life might have been like for Little Pine if Old Oak and the bushes had never been cut down. For this prompt, students must make the connection of how plot development and character development impact one another. We will go more in depth with this in just a few moments. Because there has been some debate about the use of temporal and transitional, let's only look at the function of temporal and transitional in the writing process. These words and phrases are used to sequence events and connect ideas within student writing. Because this is narrative writing, students are expected to use details and description to develop characters, setting, and events. This is where students should consider how their words create images in the minds of the reader, which creates a clearer picture. The tall oak tree stood in the field, or the old oak tree stood in the middle of the field with its branches reaching far and wide. Allow students to be creative and apply their usage of adjectives and adverbs. Students are expected to wrap up the story in a way that fits or follows from the story. This is from a student's TDW response. Let's look at what is in blue. The student begins with the environment provided in the story, but adds a puddle. Notice in the second half that the writer continues using the puddle as part of the setting. How does the puddle also impact the plot of the story, and how does it impact the character of Little Pine? Here is one idea you can use in your classroom to help students establish a setting. Start with a simple picture such as children playing on the beach. Ask questions and allow students to discuss what they see in the picture. Encourage the use of sensory words. Ask students to write a few sentences describing the setting of the picture. How can I better help my student writers establish a setting? Using the picture mentioned in the previous slide, remove the children from the picture and place their images on a different background, such as a snowy mountain. Ask students questions like, what would happen if those same children at the beach were suddenly transported to a snowy mountain? How would the sudden move affect the children in the picture? How would they feel? How would the sudden move affect what the children would do? What would they do differently in the new setting? You can also use this process to help students understand how a change in the setting affects the plot. Because the characters are in a different situation, we expect they would behave differently or do different things. Also, in the case of this photo, moving the children in their beach wear to the snowy mountain in their beach wear will create a new conflict. Let's return to the student writing sample and focus on narrator. In blue, we see that the student writer continues using the same narrator and narrative point of view from the original text. Again, if the student changes narrative point of view, it is okay, as long as they stick with what they have chosen. As a reminder, students are not expected to understand the difference between narrative points of view until 4th grade. This is covered in 1A of this webinar series. 3rd grade students can still learn about narrator without knowing the terminology point of view. The focus should be on how the story will change if a different character were telling it. Returning to the student's TDW sample, let's examine character and plot development. Notice how the student develops the characters. The characters are in blue. Through description, dialogue, direct characterization, and indirect characterization in green, the student develops Little Pine, Old Oak, and the bushes. Old Oak is a minor character and less developed. Through this student's writing, we learn that the bushes are older than Little Pine, greedy because they drink the whole puddle, mean because they laugh at Little Pine and then yell at him. However, the bushes change at the end of the story as a result of Little Pine expressing his feelings. They apologize and begin sharing the water. We learn that Little Pine is the youngest, upset about not getting to drink from the puddle, and that he is thirsty and sad. We also know that he listens to his elders and stands up for himself, which resolves his problem. The development of Little Pine and the bushes is directly connected to the plot development. How can we help students develop character and plot together? Notice in AOR 1.1, students are explaining how one or more characters develop through the plot. They are then applying this in their own writing. One easy way is to chart a character's words, actions, thoughts, and feelings throughout the story. This should first be modeled by the teacher with a mentor text before asking students to apply it to their own writing. Using a chart like this allows the student to see if the character is who the student writer intends the character to be, and it allows the student to determine if the character needs to be further developed. To connect character development to plot development, students can chart what a character does, says, thinks, or feels in various parts of the story. This should allow students to see that the character changes at some point. The question for students would then be, What happens to make this character change? In fourth grade, students can relate this to the conflict in the plot. Again, this should be used with a mentor text before being applied to their own writing. This is a great way to help students revise their narratives. In blue, you see that this student uses certain words and phrases to progress and sequence the story to its end. Remember, when teaching transitions to students, it is important that we teach students how to apply the transitions in their writing. Not all transitions will work in all modes of writing or with all purposes of writing. The student must understand how the word or phrase works in the text and what it signals to the reader. To learn more about using the sample release items to support instruction and to better understand some of the grade level indicators and gaps between the 2015 standards and the 2024 standards, watch parts 1A and 1B for grades 3 through 5. Webinar Part 2B for grades 3 through 5 focuses on 5th grade argumentative writing instruction and the TDW item. Thank you for watching this recording.